This section is about mapping 3D projects. Here I am in a 3D project of GINT Civil Tools. I have one borehole selected, and you can see the properties I have that I've imported from GINT. And what I'm going to do now is actually connect and map 3D elements. Specifically here, we're going to do the example with lithology. So I'm going to add a new data type, and for this one I will call it lithology. It's going to be a depth bottom. You see I have a few different options: depth length for things like samples, and depth only for elements that might be just by a depth, such as water or environmental readings, as well as a custom option. You say OK. By default it goes to lithology, but you can change that to any table. And so I'm mapping the correct points in the GINT database. I'm using graphic because not all elements in the database have a USCS, but they all have a graphic. As discussed before, I can import additional properties. I can either do them one at a time, or if I know I want to select all of them, I can populate the entire table and say OK. So the representation, here it says level creation. If I select none, the data will be imported into the active level at this time. So level is default. So if I selected none, all of my information for lithology, all elements would be imported into the default layer. If I select identifier, then it will group different levels based on the identifier, which here would be graphic. So each material type would be grouped onto a different level within GINT Civil Tools. And finally, you can use table name. If I chose table name, all elements would be grouped onto a level created based on table name. So if I use table name here, all elements would be grouped onto a level called lithology. This is useful if you use water levels and you don't have a water level event. And it could also be used if you don't have a sample ID. All samples could be identified or put onto a single level. For now, we're going to choose identifier. And we'll keep a cylinder because we have a depth, bottom depth. The size is for visual purposes only, so it will show based upon the master units being used in this project. So here you can see it's 7, so we can use 6 if we want. Proportional size we'll discuss in another video. So I have my elements. Here you can see I went to my project table and I connected my database, so I'm ready to go. So I say OK because it is now active. I can query all. I can select the boreholes I want to import, or if I don't select any, all of them will be imported. I select retrieve, and here you can see I have cylinders, and clicking on it you can see my lithology and my level. Here you can see the lithology information I actually have, the description, line type, USCS. There is no additional description, but if I were to maybe select a different one, here you can see my description: tan and gray sand with sand with gravel. My USCS, identifier SWG, that is my graphic. Now if I go into my level information, you can see I have my graphics. So all of them, whether they are USCS or not, are in my project. Coming over to the database connectivity, here you can see library is an option. I can actually connect to a library and say OK. And if I re-query my elements, the colors have changed, and that's because now instead of basing them off of the short name, if you were to look into the GINT library, there's an associated name, and so it's using that associated name or long name instead of the short name. So here you can see we have USCS, well-graded gravelly sand. So it is able to read some elements out of a library in terms of additional information for those drop-down lists. If I were to go to the Explorer, I can also start investigating information. So if I were to select, say, silty sand, you can see that this element is now selected, and that's my USCS silty sand. If I clear my selection now and were to just select that one, and I go to my Properties Explorer, you can see I see the information for that specific element. And you can now see as I back out all of my elements that I have imported for my lithology.